Hello there and welcome to my guide for painting Angel and Archangel for Marvel Crisis Protocol. As you can see, I've sprayed Angel with some matte white spray and I've sprayed Archangel with some matte black spray. Both these sprays are from Colourforge. Starting with Archangel, I'm first going to paint his wings with some lead belcher. Then I'll get a wash with some Nuln oil. While that wash dries, we'll move on to Angel and we're going to paint his wings with some Morghast bone. And for those wings, we're going to give those a wash with some Army Painter soft tone. Once those washes have dried, I'm then going to dry brush back on the lead belcher onto Archangel. This will then be followed by a 50-50 mix of lead belcher and Stormhost silver. And then finally, Stormhost silver just by itself. Next up, to start work on his blue sections, I'm going to use some Cantor blue. And for his face, I'm going to use some Lothern blue. All of that blue will then get washed with some Drakenhof Nightshade. And of course, while that wash dries, we're going to dry brush the Morghast bone back onto the wings of Angel. This will be followed by a 50-50 mix of Morghast bone and Wraith bone. Then that'll be followed up even further by that same mix, but at a 70-30 ratio. Then Wraithbone all by itself. And then lastly, a 50-50 mix of Wraithbone and matte white for a much lighter dry brush, just so we can kind of pick out the rest of those finer details. After that, we're then going to move on and start painting his red with some Mephiston red. All that red will then receive a wash with some Carroburg Crimson. Once the wash is dried on the Cantor blue, we're then going to relayer the Cantor blue just to pick out some of those details, so make sure you avoid any of the recesses. And then we'll follow that up with a second highlight, but this time we're going to use a 50-50 mix of Cantor blue and Atolic blue. Then we're going to move on to the pinky parts, which we're going to use some Screamer Pink. And this will then be given a wash with some Carroburg Crimson. And while that wash dries, we'll go back to Angel and we're going to use some Mephiston red just to relayer the suit and brighten things up a little bit. This will then be followed by a 50-50 mix of Mephiston red and Evil Sunz scarlet for the next highlight. And then lastly, we're going to use Evil Sunz scarlet just by itself for a final highlight. Then we're going to go back to the pink and we're going to relayer the Screaming Pink, taking care to avoid any of the recesses. And this will then be followed by a 50-50 mix of Screamer Pink and Pink Horror. And then finally, that same mix, but at a 70-30 ratio in favour of Pink Horror. Moving back to Angel and the white, I'm going to start with a base coat of Grey Seer. This will be followed by a 50-50 mix of Grey Seer and matte white. And then finally, matte white just by itself. For Angel's face, I'm going to use some Kislev flesh. This will then be washed with some Reikland flesh shade. While that dries, we're going to start working on both the puffs of smoke from the debris on Archangel and the sort of puff of smoke at the bottom of Angel. We're going to use some Wraithbone. This will then be followed up by a 50-50 mix of Wraithbone and matte white. And I don't want it to be too white, so I'm going to do that same mix, but at a 70-30 ratio in favour of matte white. Once the wash on Angel is dry, I'm going to start painting both eyes with some Abaddon Black. This will be followed by matte white. And then finally a Baden black again for the pupils. To paint Archangel's skin, I'm going to relayer the Lothan blue. And that'll be followed by a 50-50 mix of Lothan blue and matte white. For Angel's face, I'm going to relayer the Kislev flesh. And then that'll be followed by a 50-50 mix of Kislev flesh and matte white. To paint the inner markings of the column that Archangel is breaking, I'm going to use some XV88. And I'll also use it to paint the mud at the bottom. This will then be followed by a quick dry brush of Tau Light Ochre. Moving on to any metal sections on the bases, I'm going to use some lead belcher. And then for any of the concrete, I'm going to use some Dawnstone. All that Dawnstone will then get edge highlighted with a little bit of grey sear. Then, to tidy up the rims and to paint the white rim, I'm going to use some Abaddon Black. So also at this stage, I completely forgot to paint Angel's hair, so for that, I'm going to use some Xandri Dust. And to give it some depth, I'm going to use a little bit of Army Painter Soft Tone. And finally, I'm going to wash the entire base, including the column, but not the puffs of smoke, with some watered down Agrax Earthshade. And with that, that's these guys finished. They're an absolute blast to paint. They're really quite quick as well. In fact, they only took me about 4 hours for the pair. It's one of the reasons why I absolutely love painting Marvel stuff. It's nice and quick to do because the colour schemes even, are quite basic. If you followed this guide, I really do hope it helped. And if you want to see more, we've got plenty more Marvel Crisis Protocol stuff on the channel, as well as all sorts of other stuff as well. Marvel Zombies, Star Wars Shatterpoint, Warhammer 40,000, a little bit of the old world. Sort of just have a look around, really. And if you want to give the channel a subscribe, and a video a like, I'd be so appreciative. Thanks again for watching, and again, I really do hope it helped. All that's left to say is goodbye for now. So goodbye for now.